Hello and welcome to Comic Culture. I'm Terence Dollard, a professor in the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. My guest today is Axel Alonso. He is the Chief Creative Officer for AWA Studios. Axel, welcome to Comic Culture.
Thanks for having me.
So Axel, I'm going to ask a couple of questions because AWA Studios is a new name for me, and I'm just wondering, what is AWA Studios and what do you do as the Chief Creative Officer?
AWA Studios is a new publisher. We formed about 2 years ago. I reteamed with Bill Jemas, my colleague at Marvel Comic Books. I was editor-in-chief at Marvel Comic Books prior. I had left Marvel when Bill called me and said that he wanted to talk with me about a possible venture, about starting a new publisher that would do creator-owned works. So AWA Studios was born. We published our first books the week of the shutdown in the pandemic. But the funny thing is that our first book, The Resistance, tells the creation of a new super universe by J. Michael Straczynski that is born of a pandemic. It was written a full year before COVID happened by J. Michael Straczynski. Prophetic. So we publish a wide range of material that spans and blends all genres, from crime to horror, science fiction, romance, and superheroes. We have some of the top talent in the industry. J. Michael Straczynski, Mike Deodato, Garth Ennis, Peter Milligan, Frank Cho, Greg Hurwitz, a lot of great people working for us.
I'm imagining that starting a new imprint or starting a new publisher when the pandemic hits, that's got to be a whole lot of situations that didn't come up when you were the editor-in-chief at Marvel Comics because, well, there was no pandemic until 2020 in this country that really, in our lifetimes. So how did you sort of keep everything going, even though things are changing in a way that are completely unexpected?
I'm glad you asked. I mean, obviously, when the pandemic hit, we were worried. What we did is we decided that because we knew our comic books were at the stores, we didn't want to be invisible. So we released them for free online as webtoons. We let people read them for free, assuming that once they read them, they'd see how good they were. And when the stores reopened, they would buy them. We were right. When the stores reopened sooner than we thought they would, a few weeks later, our books flew off the shelves and we did very well. So our sales have been really good and our sales have been trending upward because we've only been publishing for like a year and a half at this point. But our sales are trending upward. So that our sales figures of new number ones are topping what they were in the beginning. So it worked out very well for us.
It seems that, again, this is something where your experience in publishing must come in very handy. I mean, you're dealing with creators who have big reputations, and they're coming to you because they trust you and your ability and your partner's ability to get the books into stores. So how do you sort of set up that business so that you're maybe getting your books through Diamond or on Webtoons or something like that, so that way they're coming to you, you're able to deliver on the promise of a great imprint?
We're veterans of the comic book industry, so we've been around the block. It's not our first rodeo, so we knew how to get attention, how to get into Diamond, how to publicize the books, and get them seen in the media and all the rest. So it really is just the result of many, many years in industry by myself and Bill Jemas, who was the former president of Marvel. So he hired me at Marvel in 2000. So the thing is, we knew what we were doing about getting the books into stores. And again, my Rolodex is deep. I have a lot of relationships built over 20 years in the business. So I tapped people I wanted to work with and trusted to get involved. But our company's built on a simple theory. In comic books, creators have two choices. Either they can go to work for hire. Marvel and DC will write a book or draw a book about a character that they don't own for a reliable paycheck. Or they can bet on themselves and do creator-owned, something that they create from scratch and own, on the hope that it will sell enough that they'll get paid decently. But there's no guarantees. Now, if you're Robert Kirkman or Mark Miller, you do really well in creator-owned. But if you're not, you may not be bringing in the money you want, the revenue you need to support yourself or your family. Especially for artists, this is a big thing, because you have to decide, do I want to draw Deadpool or Robin for a steady paycheck, or a creator-owned book where I may not see a cent? So what our theory was that we could give creators the best of both worlds. We could offer them the creative freedom of doing creator-owned work that they create from scratch and that they have a stake in, and the stability of work for hire. We would pay them a competitive rate to do that work. So whether the book performed or not, it would still get paid. And if it did well, then they would get the benefits that come with that. So we took all the risk. We'll fund the book. We'll do all the work. We'll provide the services to you, publicizing it, promoting it, and selling it as IP potentially. And it was something that it was a persuasive argument. A lot of people were intrigued by that.
It's funny, you know, if you travel the country and you're on the highways, the familiar signs of the fast food chains are an easy choice, but going off the highway and looking for a local restaurant could always be a bit risky. So in the world of comics, I'm imagining, you know, trying to get people to look beyond the offerings of Marvel or DC. It's got to be a bit of a challenge, and you've got some great creators working with you. And it's just fascinating to me that you are providing them with an infrastructure where not only can they afford to do what they want to do, but they can have that long-range financial stake in that. So when you're dealing with these creators, how do you sort of pitch that to them? Because it sounds great to me, but I'm imagining that there's always that hint of doubt, because you know McDonald's always looks better than that local restaurant you don't quite don't know if it's good or not.
Pretty much what it comes down to is if it's an established creator like Straczynski or Ennis or Cho, I have a long relationship with them, a trust that's forged, a mutual trust forged over many years. With younger creators, a lot of them are very intrigued by the prospect of A, working with me, and B, my reputation is good, and B, knowing they'll have the support of the infrastructure and my editorial team to make sure that their work is as good as it can be. No, I reached out to a young writer named John Lees when we started. He did a book called Hotel. It's been a real sensation. We're doing the second season right now. There's a lot of interest in the IP out there in Hollywood. And again, he got all the support of our team, our expertise. So he just needed to worry about writing the book. The key thing I tell people is you just worry about creating a really good story. We'll worry about everything else. And it works. Because it's simple. There's no tricks there. You're going to get paid to do your work, whether it performs or not. And if it performs extremely well, you'll get paid even more. And you get the satisfaction of creating something from scratch. You know, I was editor-in-chief at Marvel for, 8 years. And before that, an executive editor for like 10 years. And the thing is, it was a fun job in many, many ways. But the thing is, you're always dealing with characters that have existed for decades. So you're always filling the silhouette of a character with meaning. Whether it's Captain America or the Hulk, you inherit a toy, someone else's toy, and you play with it. It's so much more satisfying to look at a white sheet of paper in the beginning of the day and create the toy, to create the entire character, create the world from scratch. You can do anything you want. We span and blend genres all the time. We have a book that's about gangsters and ghosts. A book it's a feminist sci-fi Western. We have a lot of wide-ranging material by wide-ranging creators.
And I'm guessing that variety of different creators gives AWA a very open palette. I mean, basically, whatever idea comes, as long as you think it's going to work, you can put that out there, because it doesn't have the preconceived notion of, let's say, DC being the Justice League or Batman. It's sort of that open slate of characters. Now, the one question I'm going to ask is, as the Chief Creative Officer, how do you help the creators refine their concept? I mean, I'm sure the ideas are good, they're professionals, but can you offer them any sort of advice or suggestions to maybe polish the idea, or maybe see something that they missed and make the book a little bit better?
Yeah, that's part of the job. Is you're the first line of defense for them. You're the first honest read, honest commentary before the audience. So your goal is, sometimes I find a baby in the bathwater. Sometimes there's a really good startup, a good setup, but the follow-through doesn't really have momentum. So it's my job and my crew's job to come back with relevant notes, and then see if we can agree on what the strategy will be. Then there's other occasions where someone just comes with a fully formed idea. Like Garth Ennis came with Marjorie Finnegan, Temporal Criminal, with a fully formed idea. I loved it. There wasn't much for me to say apart from let's do this, But something else, I've had a few things where people pitch me something, and I like the setup. We had to discuss in depth where the story goes and what the point of the story is. And then, if we agree, then we can move forward. And the results of those have been some really good series at this point.
And now you say the word series. Is this something where you're hoping that the creators are going to come to you with something more than just one arc or one story
Yes.
for these characters? You're hoping that this is going to be something that could be expanded into years and years of publication.
Every story we do has a possibility of more chapters. I mean, Hotel, which I just mentioned, is already on a season 2. Year Zero had a season 2. We're working on season 3 now. The Resistance had a volume 2. So all of the stories we do with the open possibility of a sequel and making it into a franchise. But it doesn't have to be one. There are stories I've done, like Old Haunts, which is a movie, not a TV series. It's the story's done. The story's over when the story's done. Now, I suppose if people say we loved it so much, maybe we can go back and revisit it, but there's no plan to out the gate. But for the most part, American Ronin, Devil's Highway, Year Zero, The Resistance, Erratic, they're all planned as seasons, a season of TV, so to speak, to be followed by another season. It tells a full story with enough loose ends and intrigue to bring you back for a second season.
And this is really a fascinating approach that you're taking. I think thanks to streaming services, we're used to seasons of a show and we kind of binge it. And then we wait eagerly for that next story arc to come through. And by sort of adopting that terminology for comics, are you finding that this is a great way to reach people who may or may not have been traditional comics readers?
Well, our sales are good and we're off to a good start, so I would say yes. I mean, honestly, when I was at Vertigo, working on creator-owned books like Preacher and 100 Bullets, I would say with the creative team, Preacher would make a really, really good cable TV show. It's too crazy for network. But like The Sopranos, it could be a really great cable TV show. Now, years later, you see it on TV, as well as The Boys. So a long time ago, I saw the possibility of doing adventurous genre work, good stories that could live beyond the comic book page on other media. Because let's face it, a good story can be anything. A book, a movie, a cartoon, a TV show, prose, illustrated fiction, whatever. If it's a good story, it's a good story. So I viewed it like that back at Vertigo. And when I was at Marvel, one of the things I encouraged was doing seasons within the individual books. The writer would come on to do a significant arc of their character's life. A story that might last 6, 8, 10, 12 issues. And then someone else would come on and do another season. They may pick up on some threads from the previous writer, but maybe not, maybe didn't.
Now, you mentioned working at Marvel, and I'm just going to go back again. This is sort of that seasons concept. You were at Marvel at the time when the industry is changing from being the individual issues to being more like, I guess the phrase is writing for the trades, where the expectation is that after you do 6 issues or maybe a year, that's going to be, printed together in one volume so that you can go to a bookstore and pick up a collection of Spider-Man or X-Men and read through an entire story. So, you're at Marvel at that time. How are you sort of, working in that environment, and what sort of input do you have to go in that direction?
A lot of input, because I came from Vertigo, where that's what we did all the time. All of the Vertigo books, whether they were limited series or ongoing series, were written for the trade. They were written in arcs, so you told a chunk of story that gave the reader some satisfaction, some resolution, but not enough that the story's over. So you keep going and moving forward. But again, like a television show, you have a season of TV that's satisfying in its own right, but doesn't tell the whole story. So I was a big proponent of that when it came to Marvel. It informed the Marvel line, the Ultimates line, the Max line, all the lines. And so the thing is, it was a natural thing for me to want to do it at AWA Studios, at Upshot.
Another thing that happens during your time at Marvel is obviously the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I'm just wondering, you talk about all these plans you have for the AWA IP that you're working with, all these great creators. So how do you sort of, figure out that path to go from the comic to the small screen or the big screen?
Well, luckily, that's not my job, but I am involved in it. My job is to make a good story as a comic book and a graphic novel, but I do so with an eye toward telling a good story, which means it could be more than that. It could also be. And so we have our studio, we have another division at the company, our studio, AWA Studios, run by Zach Studin, who came in and was hired recently. And he's the one who helps us chart the path to movies and TV. We sold Chariot already to Warner Brothers. It was announced in Deadline about 2 months ago in a bidding war between Sony and Warner Brothers. Joseph Kosinski, the director of the upcoming Top Gun 2, is going to direct it. So we've already sold that, and we're going to have more announcements very soon about other IP we sold as well. And that's where Zach and I double team on this. That's his lane, not mine. His lane is, he knows that world. He lives over there. He knows the producers, the directors, the studios. So he's the one who's able to position things. Like, for instance, we have another book we'll be announcing soon where he sent the book to a prominent showrunner he knew. This showrunner loved the book and said, I want to do this. And then this showrunner has the clout to bring it to market. So again, he knew that he had a strategy, but it was also the personal connection. The same way that I can call Joe Straczynski or Garth Ennis or Frank Cho, Zach can call people and say, look, I have a really special story. I think this is up your alley. When we announce this and people see who the showrunner is and what the book is, you'll understand why he sent it to this person. Why it's perfect for them.
And I'm imagining, too, that the fact that there are so many new streaming services out there that it makes it easier for you to maybe make a sale somewhere, even at a company that might be owned by, Warner Media or even, Disney or something like that, where they would have an interest in producing something like that. So as you're working and sort of feeling out the industry, are you noticing any sort of new trends that you think you're going to have to explore soon, or do you think the market is still going to be the print book, the digital book, the trade book, and then eventually some sort of new IP on streaming or in this big screen?
I think print is here to stay. People, again, like I listen to all my music on my iPhone. I don't need an album on my shelf to enjoy music. I need headphones and an iPhone, But comic books are a different medium. I think that there's always going to be a value to having a book you can put on your shelf. And there's also books you can read both ways, as digital and as a, but again, there's something satisfying about picking up a book, owning a book, holding it, feeling it in your hands. They can't be replaced, for starters. That does not mean that other innovations won't come along, or that we won't get better and better at telling comic books on handheld media. We will. And also, I think you'll see more move toward iTunes and vertically scrolled comic books. In Korea, that's the way my wife is Korean, I've been to Seoul, and the way that people absorb comic books is vertical scroll comic books. It's the easiest way to read a comic book. You just scroll down, it's a natural motion, and the comic book is formatted different, but it's a very satisfying read. So I think that'll be a big thing in the future. It already is, but it'll be even bigger down the road. It hasn't quite caught on in this country, but it will.
Now, I've spoken with Monica Gallagher. She's a cartoonist who worked on a webtoon called Assassin Roommates. And she talked about the interesting new storytelling approaches that there are when you're doing that sort of scrolling comic, and how you can use, blank spaces to sort of, build tension or to give a pause to an action sequence. So as you are working with these great creators who might be used to a traditional, Bristol board, pen and ink, or even, working on a Cintiq or something like that, are you sort of thinking, maybe, hey, we can take this and do it as this new kind of scrolling comic?
Yes, and it's amazing how easily creators can adapt to new media when they're a capable storyteller, either as a writer or as an artist. During the COVID pandemic, the early days, I thought to myself, you know what? We should do a series of stories about people that are first responders to the crisis as a series of webtoons. And I talked with Ethan Sachs, the reporter and comic book writer. He jumped on board, and Adela Bortologic drew it, and it was an amazing series that NBC News loved so much, they put it on NBCnews.com, where it got 100 million views, And the thing was, it was real stories of the pandemic. They were surprisingly intimate stories told in a new format, and the writer and the artist adjusted like that to telling that story. And it was seen by more people than any comic we've done. You've seen on NBCnews.com, won a major journalism award, and won a New York Press Journalism Award. Our first time doing journalism, won a major award. So the thing is, I think there's always the ability to adjust your skill set to new media.
And it's funny because your background is originally print journalism, I guess. In the
Yeah.
90s, you were working for I believe, the New York Daily News, and then on a lark, you applied for a job at DC Comics for their vertical line as an editor. So how do you sort of, take the skills that seem to be for one medium and move it into, from nonfiction news
Yeah.
and sort of jump into comics and still have everything kind of work for you?
Well, the main thing for me is when I was a journalist, the most satisfying stories for me that I wrote were stories that told a narrative where a character took a journey and had an arc. So even though it was nonfiction, there was an arc to the story. There was meaning to the story. It wasn't just me reporting that someone was shot on the corner of 3rd and Brannan. It was, or getting quotes from people about what they saw. It was telling the story of the world's greatest handball player, or a pimp who has 5,000 patents across the United States. Literally a guy in Oakland. It was an inventor pimp, a blind boxer. I enjoyed writing these stories because they were about fascinating people that told real stories. So the thing is that when I shifted to comic books, one of the things I did was I brought a lot of my journalism background into comic books. Because I once at Vertigo, many of the books were supernatural books by Neil Gaiman and John Ney Reber. They were fantasy, dark fantasy. They drew from mythology and the pantheons of dark fantasy, and that's not my bag. I read crime and horror and political science. So for me, it was about finding a way to bring that stuff into my books. And I did that at Marvel as well. One of the first things I did at Marvel was a book called Truth, Red, White, and Black, which said, before Steve Rogers got the needle in his arm, there were guinea pigs. They were not white men. It was a platoon of black soldiers, because that's who Uncle Sam would have tried the drug on. They would not have tried it on white boys. And this is based on history of Tuskegee experiments with syphilis. So I said, this is how it would have happened. I spoke with Robert Morales, our journalist at Vibe, and Kyle Baker, a celebrated cartoonist. And the two of them said, we buy that as well. They wrote a book called Truth, Red, White, and Black, which told the story of the first Captain America, a black man named Isaiah Bradley, who was part of a platoon of soldiers who were given the serum with grave consequences. And Isaiah was, in fact, the first person to successfully wear the red, white, and blue. It was a seismic book. I got lots of hate mail when I did it at the time, because it was 20 years ago. It was very, very controversial, but best-selling book. And it showed up in Falcon and the Winter Soldier TV show at the end, the final episode. I almost cried. Couldn't believe it. There he is, Isaiah Bradley, my baby, on TV. Everyone hated me. Even people at Marvel said, this is lame. I don't get this. Why are you doing this? And I said, I'm doing this because it's real, because this is the way the real history would have played. You follow me? I think it's important that comic books reflect the world the way it really is and tell the stories of our history and where we are now. At Marvel, I wanted our books to be diverse. I wanted our characters to look like people you see on the street and all the diversity. I'm Hispanic. My wife is Korean, you understand? So having Black, Hispanic, Asian characters is very important. And telling stories about what's happening in the world is important. If I were a chief at Marvel, there would be stories about creeping fascism. There'd be stories about children in cages on the border. There'd be stories about an insurrection in the state capitol. I would have went away from that. I think it's a responsibility to write about that, at least as metaphor. I brought that aspect of the real world is important to me to bring the real world into this meeting. And I'm doing it in every way as well.
It's fascinating because when we look at the early comics, yes, most of the characters are going to be white, but they are written by a lot of Jewish writers and artists who are looking at either the immigrant experience or they're looking at the fascism that's rising up in Nazi Germany, and they're writing books about it. And it's fascinating that we see, and unfortunately we only have about 3 minutes left, and I don't think this is enough time to dig into it, but it's fascinating that there's a segment of the audience that doesn't want comics to tell stories that look at things that are uncomfortable. Yep. And there's clearly writers and artists who have a great deal of vision in the world and want to tell a story that reflects it. So, I'm imagining at Marvel, it's got to be a tough balancing act between, giving the readers what they want and giving them what they need. So how do you sort of thread that needle and make sure that the stories are going to have a great superheroic impact, but also get the satisfaction that you want out of it as a writer or editor?
I did it for a while at Marvel, but I got to a point when I realized that I was a blue state editor in a red state company, you know? And again, the thing is that I'm happy now because what I'm doing now, I don't have to worry about a corporate overlord. I create with my creators books that span genres, that tell stories about the world today. I mean, the Resistance book is a universe born in a pandemic, written before the pandemic happened, that explores creeping fascism in the wake of the pandemic. As people fearful of what's happened, look for scapegoats, and opportunists rise to power to find scapegoats. You understand? I mean, it sound like the world we're in? So again, and the books I'm doing now, I've got a book about a soccer mom who channels her inner punishment, you know, a zombie book, which takes a look at the zombie apocalypse through the eyes of diverse characters from around the world. Because if the dead start to walk again, and you're a Muslim woman in Afghanistan, your perspective is going to be very different than that of a Yakuza hitman in Tokyo, or an incel in Minnesota. You know, you're going to have a different way of looking at this. So it's a way of looking at the world through the prism of a zombie apocalypse. Again, it's relevant.
Axel, I'm sorry that we got into this subject a little bit too late in the show, but we are out of time. I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule.
Let's do this another show. Let's revisit this, all right?
I would love to do that.
We'll do this another show. I promise you. Yeah, I'd love to talk about it.
Well, thanks again for giving the time to us today. Thanks everyone at home for watching Comic Culture. We will see you again soon. Comic Culture is a production of the Department of Mass Communication at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke.